So, if we're thinking about treatment, starting with the stages of change, one of the things I want us to think about is while the client is in the pre-contemplative stage, by that they're saying they genuinely don't believe that they've got a problem. Someone else believes they have a problem, and that's that person's problem, not their problem. So the one thing to look at is you're not going to be trying to preach about, hey, I promise you this is a problem, but you're expanding your look into their lives and identifying things that they consider a struggle, something that's a problem for them. So, people don't appreciate me. My wife is always nagging me. My parents are always on my back. And so what you're looking for is you're looking for something that the client identifies as a problem that they care about, rather than someone else telling them that they've got a problem. I can't tell you how important that is. That's the first and most important hook. You usually don't get anywhere without it. So one of the things that I enjoy motivational interviewing as a tool, partially because a lot of what you're doing is you're digging around inside of them to help them find their own awareness that change needs to occur and their own motivations for changes. So I want to spend just a little bit of time reviewing a couple of principles from motivational interviewing that help in the early stages of treatment. So there are a couple of general principles. First is expressing empathy. You do not want to put yourself in the position of the lecturer, the hitman, the heavy hand, the instrument of the law or the bishop or the wife or whoever it may be. Going into this, a lot of what you want to do as you're speaking with your clients is you want to make sure you're expressing empathy. But it's not just parenting back, hey, you sound sad, you sound happy. In motivational interviewing, effective empathy helps create momentum in moving a certain direction. So as a part of your reflection, empathic reflections, part of what you're trying to do is to also say, here's what I hear you saying, and it sounds like between the lines you're also saying X, right? So you're saying just a little bit more and hopefully identifying something that is quite true for them. So, for example, when I was working with a client yesterday, we were talking about I just presented to him kind of my clinical understanding of a situation, and sort of as he was reflecting back, one of the things I had to say is that, and you're worried about my motives in telling you about this. You're worried that if you begin to buy into this idea that there might be something to what we're talking about here, that essentially you're going to put down all of your guards and then I'm going to manipulate and control you and you won't have control. And he is like, yeah, okay. All right, so what do? We spend some time on that, right? And so this is actually really powerful because one, it's showing that you're connected, you can understand them, that you are not just trying to help them take everyone else's perspective, you are genuinely trying to take theirs. So what you're doing is you're avoiding judging, you're avoiding criticizing, you're avoiding blaming. And that's difficult because around pornography, a lot of times they're feeling judged, criticized, and blamed. For some of them, it's like, I'm in violation of my religious principles. For some of them, it's my wife says I'm ruining our marriage, whatever it may be. You need to not go there with them in the beginning. Now, they may get to a point where as you're moving along, they can say, holy cow, I think I'm ruining my marriage. You're like, whoa, wow, that must really hurt to think that you're doing something to destroy a relationship that matters so much to you. That's really different than saying, dude, you're ruining your marriage and you need to get that through your thick head, right? It's a whole different experience. But another thing to keep in mind is that there's this recognition that ambivalence is the normal and expected emotion to have. Yeah, you probably want some things to change. You would also be really happy if suddenly everyone just decided this wasn't a problem and just left you alone. There's some times when you want to change this. There's some times when you don't. That's called being human. That's okay. Sometimes it's our pressure to make them want to feel like they want to change that makes it so they never will. No one wants to win if it means surrendering. No one wants to get better if it means that someone else took control of your life. And that's especially true if you're addicted to something. So that's a really important principle to keep in mind. Second, you're wanting to develop discrepancy. So by that specifically, you're wanting to take a look at what's going on in their life and just beginning to raise awareness of that as its own task, right? But taking a look at how well does that fit with what you value? How well does that fit with what you want for your future? Does that work? Is that likely to get you where you want to go? Is that contributing to anything? A really, really simple situation is, boy, I really, really want my wife to be able to trust me. Oh, yeah. And that must be really hard because every time you're using pornography, you're feeling like you've got to hide that. It makes that really hard. Well, yeah, but if she just wouldn't have a problem with porn, then I wouldn't have to lie to her. Yeah, that would be really difficult. Unfortunately, I don't think we can change the way she feels about this. There's something she's trying to say that's really hard, but this must be really hard because there's a part of you that wishes she would just get over it. But you also don't like that you're dishonest to her. And you just sit in that, and they go, "Ooh, that doesn't feel good." But it's not because we gave them a guilt trip. It's that you took two parts of their lives that are incompatible, and in an empathic and understanding way, just sat them together with them. And what happens? They feel something. Rather than someone else telling them they should feel something, they feel something. And when you think about human beings, we only change when the discomfort of staying the same is greater than the discomfort of changing. And so you're trying to help them find those places in their life where what they desire, what they want, who they want to be is not matching well with what's going on with them. And you help them sit with it and tolerate it long enough until they decide, okay, I'm either going to live with this or I'm going to change. Resistance, you're going to run into it all the time. There's going to be self-justification, there's going to be rationalization, there's going to be blaming, there's going to be all kinds of things. The idea in motivational interviewing is when you run into resistance, rather than approaching it like Dr. Phil, you're going to approach it like Bruce Lee. You're going to roll with it. So you don't go and say, okay, I'm going to beat you and teach you why you need to change. You're not directly opposing it, but you are inviting new perspectives. So sometimes it can be some things like, yeah, I can see why you feel that strongly about that. And I can see how that makes you feel safe. I'm wondering how well that's working for you in getting what you want. Or saying, I suppose you could stay with that. How do you imagine that would look long term? What are you going to have to do? If this is genuinely how you feel and it's incompatible with this other thing, how do you imagine those things living together, or can they? And so you're inviting other perspectives, but you're never coming out and saying, dude, you're wrong. This is what's really up. And so a lot of what you're doing is you see resistance as a signal that you need to respond differently, rather than saying, I found your resistance, you're pathological, which is really fun to do, but doesn't really get us very far as clinicians. So, fourth is support self-efficacy. One of the reasons people don't change is because they don't believe they can. They don't believe they can sustain it. So this idea of building confidence in their ability to actually change. And part of that looks like helping them touch base with when they've done hard things, when they've made changes, when they've been successful, and taking small steps towards that change. Now, what you don't want to do is say, you're good enough and you're smart enough and doggone it, people like you and you can do anything you put your mind to. Thank you. That'll be $5.95. So there's this aspect of you need to plug into what they experience, what they feel, that feels credible, rather than giving them a pep talk. So here's a hard truth, and this one is so hard, especially if you work a lot with pornography. You're getting people sent to you by bishops, you're getting people sent to you by whatever it may be, and they're saying, fix this person. Your job is to fix this person. Well, you know what? Sometimes the client may choose not to care. You may do everything right in therapy. You may go there and ultimately they say, you know what? The cost of this is worth it. It's like my boss. He's like, speeding ticket's worth it because it means most of the time I get to go place faster. So it's like my rent that I pay to be able to drive really fast all the time. I'm like, I'm not sure that's the way that works, but that's the way he sees it, and he's never going to change his mind about that. And so it's very possible that someone will come in, they will have insight, they will see clearly all of the downsides and determine that's worth it for me. I will stay the same. So it's not our job to bludgeon them if that's the case. So what do we do when that's the case? Well, what we sometimes have to do is help them switch to say, okay, so you've been clear. You're not going to change this. So let's be clear. What is that realistically going to look like in your life? That means, how are these pieces going to respond? How's that going to go? What are you going to need to do to support this decision to not change? Now, the funny thing is, by going into that conversation, sometimes they go, oh crap, that's not worth it. And now I feel ambivalent because it feels not worth it to change and not worth it to have to put up with all the garbage of not changing. And then you go through the cycle again. But sometimes it's very clear, like, but my wife will leave me. That's true. She probably will. How are we going to help you live your life with your wife having left you? But I'll lose my job. Yeah, you're probably right. I won't have my temple recommend. Yeah, that's true. So we're going to have to adapt to that being the circumstances in your life. What is that going to take? How can I help that be as satisfying for you as it possibly can be? And you can't just say it to say, ha, this will make them tilt over the other direction. Sometimes that's your therapeutic work. Okay, all right, let's help you deal with that the best you can. It's not the fuzzy part of therapy, but sometimes where we get in real trouble is when we decide, no, they will change because I want them to. And that's where we get in trouble. So this can look like, well, my spouse is going to continue to use porn and be unavailable to me and the children and treat me like an object. My spouse is not going to change. So how do I want to respond to that? Is that okay with me? Do I want to continue to live my life that way? Do I have other options? What am I going to choose? You'll notice I'm talking about the spouse. Do not neglect the spouses. They often find themselves in these tough spots without any recourse. Or, I'm probably not going to become less socially anxious and will continue to isolate myself. Okay, how do I want to deal with that? What's the best way to go about that? How can I make that as satisfying as possible? Well, my spouse is going to continue to feel like I don't love him or her and may decide to leave. How do I want to respond to that? And so it's just, okay, you can make that choice. Here's the reality. Let me help you make that reality work for you the best that I can. My wife is not going to feel comfortable leaving my teenage daughter home alone with me. What options does that leave me with? I probably need to start budgeting for a babysitter a little bit more. And I probably need to, here's what I'm going to have to do. And, whatever it may be. Or often this is an important question. Is this the marriage I want for the rest of my life? If my spouse will continue to objectify me, if my spouse will continue to dismiss something that is highly distressing to me, I need to genuinely ask this question. Does this marriage have enough else in it that makes it worth it for me? Or do I have another option? Okay, are we all depressed yet? Okay, let's move on. So the good news is most people, when faced with those stark realities, will go, okay, you've got a point. Let me see where I'm going here. So as we move out of pre-contemplation, they're saying, okay, now there's something that has to change. But the question is, what exactly and how much? So when you think about the stages of grief, this correlates with the bargaining stage. All right, well, what if I can, do this much, but can I still hang on to these pieces or whatever it may be? And what you don't do, which is tempting to do, is say, like, dude, this isn't Chuck-a-rama. You don't get to come in and pick and choose, right? You want to say that, but they can't get there yet emotionally. And so it's a matter of, okay, well, let's explore exactly how much does need to change and when and where and why and how. So one of the things to keep in mind, I find myself sort of thinking about this, when it comes to draining a swamp. One of the things you'll find is that you can work really hard to dig channels that drain the swamp. But unless you do something to reroute the water coming in, you still have a swamp. And so this is often a metaphor I go towards, is like, this is what we need to figure out, or what are the things that fill the swamp? Those are the things that need to change. What are the things that drain the swamp? We need to do that, but you can't just drain it. Most people are able to accept that, and then it's a matter of exploring what really is it out there that's filling my swamp. So then we move into preparation. Now, it's very easy. A lot of times when we talk about like, okay, so I'm going to try to not use porn for at least X amount of time. One thing I want to be clear about, we'll talk about this a little bit more, is recovery isn't just simply I'm not going to use porn. Recovery is, holy cow, I have been shaped in certain attitudes and actions and patterns of behavior and ways of taking care of myself or not taking care of myself. And those are the things that I need to change in order for me to be able to function emotionally in a different way. Pornography has filled all kinds of roles in my life, and it's going to leave this big, huge, gaping hole of unmet needs and disappointment. And if I'm just going to kind of white-knuckle my way through not using porn, that's not going to work. So when you're preparing, it's not just, okay, let's have a relapse prevention plan, which you need to have, but it's that bigger picture stuff. But you're not just preparing a plan for responding to cravings as much as that's really important. So again, you're looking at, well, what was porn giving you? How can you pursue those needs in other ways? What was porn taking from you in direct cost? Sometimes it literally is cost. I know people, the funny thing is there's lots of free porn that gets you into the heavier stuff that you pay for. And it's like literally, you can be $40,000 in debt. But it's also, holy cow, like, my physical health isn't great because I'm staying up all night and, watching porn or whatever it may be. So, okay, what are the direct costs? But what are the opportunity costs? How much time, how much energy, how much investment has been paid to porn? What are other things in your life that might benefit from that time and energy and investment? Can we help you start re-engaging with that? How has porn been shaping you, your attitudes, your actions? As you're walking down the street and you see a woman, what's the automatic thoughts that come to your mind? How can you begin the process of retraining yourself, right? These are all the things that kind of fall in there. But one thing to keep in mind is, and this is kind of what I'm saying, is we're looking beyond just the identified problem. It's not just I'm watching porn or I'm not watching porn. It's everything that it is in my life. So think about this, right? The identified problem, a client might come in and he might sit down and saying, okay, so I use porn and my wife feels betrayed and belittled by it, so she wants me to stop watching porn. But you kind of dig a little bit deeper there and say, well, there's more there, isn't there? Like my wife feels that I don't reciprocate emotionally in our relationship, or I find myself constantly sexually fantasizing about the women at work and they're starting to think I'm creepy. I usually feel empty inside. I wish that I didn't have the responsibilities that I have in my life because I fantasize about being like this James Bond character, and I feel misunderstood and underappreciated. So when you take a look at those ones beneath and saying, he's probably going to be a lot more responsive to those first, and then we can use that as a way to get up to the identified problem. Let's do another vignette, right? All right, this guy is socially anxious. I get so socially anxious, I isolate a lot, I use porn and play video games, and I'm beginning to fail at my classes at school. But then he's also thinking, but that's okay because maybe I don't need to go to school because the guy who just won the Fortnite championship earned $3 million in one day, and maybe that can be me, so maybe there's a way to still make this work out, right? But what are the corollaries? Well, I get overwhelmed at school by the sense that everyone else is a better student and that I don't belong, or I have constant self-critical thoughts. There's a lot of basic life skills like doing my laundry that I don't feel confident with, or I'm just really struggling to make friends in school. He'll care about those. And then from those, you work your way up to, all right, and how can we help you with these other pieces? They all go hand in glove. Or example number 3, oh man, I got caught using porn at work, and now I'm on probation, I could lose my job. And so I'm here so I don't get fired. Please tell my boss I've done well in therapy. Thank you, right? Okay, well, wait, hold on a second. What else might be there? Well, I have very specific ideas about what it takes for a man to be attractive. And I'm now middle-aged, and I don't look like Thor, except for when he was in Endgame. I feel very self-conscious. I get very angry when someone gives me feedback. Like it gets me. It's like, I feel so criticized. Or I don't like that my supervisor's a woman and she earns more money than me. Wow, I kind of sound like a jerk when I say that out loud. Or I don't know how to connect with my children, right? So those are all more vulnerable spots, which are not going to be as defended as the presenting problem, right? All places you can start. Or this woman. I've been using porn for a while now, and if my husband ever finds out, I think he'll divorce me and take the kids with him. Well, corollaries. I feel ashamed. Isn't porn like it's a man thing? Like women don't have problem with porn. What's wrong with me? Or, wow, the more porn I've watched, I find myself being just as interested by the women's bodies as the men's now. And am I bi? Am I a lesbian? Oh man, what if I am? Because I'm LDS, and oh no, that's really important to me. But how can I be that and feel this way about women? And okay, have you got a route in? You've got a route in. Or this young man right here, he looks so happy to see you. So, my parents won't let me play Fortnite anymore because they caught me looking at Fortnite porn. Pfft. Parents, right? By the way, there's a lot of Fortnite porn, just going to say. Well, I feel lonely. And when I'm on Fortnite, I get attention. I've got friends, right? One of the guys there, who's a couple of years older than me, and he seems to think I'm pretty cool. And he started sending me some Fortnite porn, and he's actually started talking to me a lot about sex. Is there probably something there that he's feeling a little vulnerable around, something you'd work with him on? So always have your lens on to look beyond the presenting problem, because that's usually your door in. And those are usually the things where they're also feeling misunderstood, and like everyone is just trying to change them instead of trying to understand and help them, right? Your client will respond better to you when you can get there with them. So again, keep in mind, it's about the whole person. People are coming to you and they're wanting to hand you a pair of blinders and say, I just want you to see this person's pornography problem, and that's all I want you to see. And we have to be smart enough to say, thank you for the blinders. I'll put them over here in the corner with the other pile that I've received. And I'm going to look at this person and take a look at the larger picture, because we need the larger picture for them to be able to recover from the problem you've identified. So think about some of the skills and resources people might need, right? So if they're going to recover from pornography, one of the things they're going to need is the ability to tolerate negative emotion more. Because one of the things pornography teaches you, not explicitly, but in a lot of ways, of you should never feel bad. You should never be bored. You should never have to settle for something that requires effort. And so you're realizing, wow, even the work we have to do on recovering is going to require tolerating some negative emotion. And this is something that's underdeveloped for them. Or, man, I need some healthy approaches to coping skills. What do I do when I found myself stewing about the fact that my supervisor is a woman and earns more than me? I don't know what to do with those thoughts. I don't know what to do with those emotions. You're going to have to teach me. I need someone to show me how to redirect my thoughts, or the ability to be honest about the triggers that I'm having. What you don't want to do, a lot of people are really good at telling you about, oh, I relapsed again. Oh, okay. We're talking about, it's like I just got hit by the train. Oh, it's probably better for us to start talking about when you find yourself walking on the train tracks. That's probably going to help a whole lot more than just responding to you getting splattered. The ability to persist when facing stumbles, setbacks, and failures. So they also need structure. Whenever you're trying to recover from addiction, unstructured free time is rough. So having places to be, things to do, people to connect with, things that feel good. And that's one of the big challenges, is when we are talking about this, again, it's the pleasure center that has been rewired, right? And it takes a while of exposure to things that feel good for your brain to be able to say, oh yeah, other things can feel good too. And so I actually forecast that. I'm very specific, saying when you first start doing these things, they're going to feel empty and bland and lifeless. Here's why. Let me tell you how to get through that to the other end, so it becomes something which is self-reinforcing. And what they also need is they need supports that are both aware, they're smart enough and they're educated enough about what's going on that they can be there, but also non-blaming supports. And one thing I would say is sometimes you'll run into people who just can't be that. Think about how often we ask the spouse of someone who has been using porn for years, maybe has been sexually aggressive, physically abusive, and then we come to them and say, you need to be this person's number one support. What the heck are we doing? Think about that, right? That person, unless they have some significant healing of their own and figure out whether this is a relationship they even want to continue, why is it that we automatically put them in the position of being the support person? That doesn't make any sense. But yet again, that's what we're handed, right? People say, this is what we expect you to do, so do this. Be smarter. Be smarter than that. That's important for us to point that out. It's funny is when I say that out loud, they usually go like, yeah, that's a dumb idea. Why were we even thinking that? You know? So there are a couple of support systems I like to connect people to. Many of you may be familiar with Fight the New Drug. I love those guys. Their Fortify app and their program is great. Now, I will say one thing. No support system will work for someone who decides to turn it into a game and get a power and control buzz out of working and fooling the system. So sometimes that's a very overt conversation you need to have. You also got introduced to NoFap. The thing I like about these is there are daily supports, daily challenges, daily things they do together as a community. And I really enjoy that. Am I going to say this? Yeah, I'm going to say this. So in our local community, a lot of people get sent to the addiction recovery program by the LDS Church. I'm not having great results with that, guys. And there's a number of reasons why that's complicated. So if you're looking for connecting people with support programs, this is not intended as a criticism, but I'm saying I get better results by going other places than there. Sorry if that offends anyone. But I just want you guys to know what's working currently and what's not. So unfortunately, there are not a lot of local places, which is why I use a lot of these online supports. There is Sexaholics Anonymous. One thing I'd say about 12-step is 12-step only works if you have buy-in to 12-step. So if someone resonates with that, if that sounds like something they're interested in, I will have them go. But I never just say you've got to go to 12-step if it's not something they can connect with. But these are the two that I use the most often as far as connecting to support groups. I want to give a very strong caution. One of the reasons I struggle locally with the LDS recovery group is sometimes there's this idea that it gets taught of you're an addict, so this is completely out of your control. That is a misunderstanding of what addiction is. Addiction is not the annihilation of agency. It is, however, the rewiring and the restructure of agency. It is more accurate to say my brain has been wired so that some things are out of control. It doesn't mean that I don't have choices. It just changes the choices that I have and when I have to make them. So any kind of group where there's kind of this commiseration of, oh, we're addicts and this is just what we are, I push back against that. And I would say, let's go find a place which makes that differentiation. You're going to have a lot more luck there. I want to talk about family therapy. Oh my goodness, do not forget family therapy. Because when you think about like the basics of family therapy, right? So overt and covert rules, family structure, intergenerational transmission, triangulation, values. You're like, holy cow, these things are going to be rife in both part of why the problem is stuck, but also part of what's going to help things get better. What you don't want to be is be like the hitman for the family. Again, I've said that time and time again. But you want to examine the entire family dynamics. Explore what are the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors surrounding this. But also take a look at, especially one of the things you want to look at is ask the family, let's talk about shame. All right? Let's talk about both times when there have been times in the family history where the family has experienced shame. Let's also take a look on the other side is How does the family respond when people make mistakes? Do people get blamed and cast out? Or is this a family where, they're golden children and even their fertilizer smells like roses? There's this aspect of like, how is that perhaps playing into this problem? So I can't say it enough. So remember, intergenerational dynamics can help create vulnerability. Don't just look at the immediate family. At least go another generation back. Take a look at what's going on. But also keep in mind that porn can reshape family dynamics and family culture. I'm thinking of one family I'm working with where they have 6 sons. All 6 of them and their father all heavily use porn. They're all 4 of them have lost jobs over it. All 6 of them have had divorces. And yet the family's dynamic, the family's story, the narrative is porn is a minor thing. And it can't possibly have anything to do with the fact that you all got divorced, that you're hiring prostitutes, that you 3 lost jobs because of pornography. And you kind of take a look at that and say, so this is a very strong belief by the family. How did you arrive at this belief? And what has supported that? And how have you responded to when that belief is challenged, right? You want to kind of dig into that. Good family therapy is always taking what is implicit in the family, making it explicit, and saying, how did we get here? And is this working for us? But one thing you will see is problematic porn use is frequently transmitted intergenerationally. So that's one of the things you'll want to ask about is, okay, well tell me about your parents. What's their experience with porn? And usually that's when you run into, and this is how the family responds when challenged. That's a whole other thing. So I want to share with you, again, I think I was just actually kind of sharing this with you. So there's a focus. When you take a look at a family and you begin to realize, wow, there's a real focus on image and money. When there's boys can do no wrong, women should never question or embarrass men. I have one family I'm working with where the women were literally taught to end all their sentences so it sounded like a question mark, so that it wouldn't sound challenging to the men. Or this whole idea of make sure that when you have an idea that the men in the family get to claim it as one of theirs. When things go wrong, it's always someone else's fault. And there's image management rather than change and repair. So that kind of take a look at. And an extreme example of this was the family I was telling you about. When one of them lost his job, his mother wrote a note to his boss telling him, you made a real mistake. You're losing a really talented employee. And I'm like, so you're 33 and your mom wrote a note to your boss. How does that feel? But we're also especially looking at narcissistic personality styles, because when we talk about this idea, right, we talked about how porn trains us to think about people, the inherent self-centeredness, the inherent selfishness. And so when you're looking at narcissism, you're like, oh, that's interesting. And at its core, narcissism is a refusal to be able to love yourself being what you really are. And instead is creating this narrative around yourself as being something that no one is. And then punishing other people who don't agree with that story, right? And so sometimes that's kind of one thing, when we unravel narcissism, we help them realize this is about you not being able to love you. And this is about you actually punishing the people in the life who are trying to love you for what you really are, instead of what you pretend to be. That's a whole other thing. So a couple other cautions. Do not try to grand slam family dynamics that are heavily patriarchal. So if you go in with your problem is you're way too male-centric, and the dad is like God in this family. And if you go in and you try to take it head on, you know what they'll do to you, right? They're like, you're fired, see ya. So what I call the social justice worker approach, or the Dr. Phil approach, really doesn't work. It just ends up with a rejection of the therapist, even if you're right on the dot. So what you need to be doing is looking for small openings. You develop them gradually. You gradually illuminate the larger patterns. And so it's a matter of, and again, for each family, it's going to be different openings, so I can't tell, always use this one. But what you're looking for is, where is the family extremely defended? Don't try to tackle that bear from the front. Look for where the family is experiencing pain, and then trace it back, and where that big bear dynamic is making it so they can't fix that problem. Step by step, help them see a connection. And that works a lot better. So you need to anticipate that there are going to be barriers to change, right? There will be some kind of opposition. And one of the things is that a lot of times, once people are bought into the idea they need to change, motivated to change, you're going to find that there are two categories. There are challenges that they can anticipate. Okay, I know this is going to be hard for me. And there are other challenges that they can't, that they won't see coming. And sometimes it's very funny to them what they can't see coming. You might say, well, that was obvious, that was coming. But again, remember, distorted views, distorted reality testing is a part of this thing. So sometimes when you see a client really grinding down, part of what you need to take a look at is secondary gain and tertiary gain. This idea of, okay, is there something going on that's making change feel undesirable? Is it costing you something? Or is you getting better? Is that threatening something else? So let's go back to that family I was talking about. The problem with the 6 boys and the dad all having porn is if one of porn addiction problems, serious porn addiction problems, is if one of them comes out and actually begins to admit all these things as a problem, it feels disloyal to all the others. And then they're being a bad son. Okay, how do we want to deal with that? So we make that explicit and say, let's kind of work through this. So as we move into the point where they're saying, okay, we've accepted there needs to be some change. We have determined, we've kind of taken a look at a plan. Let's go ahead and move forward with change. What's difficult is that it's daunting. As I'm saying, this is a whole person change. Can you imagine saying, hey, you've got to change your whole person? Oh yeah, that sounds great. I feel totally up to that. It's too much to focus on. It's too emotionally overwhelming. So you want to go into it with laser focus. And what that means is that you, as the clinician, need to be able to tolerate the fact that there are certain things in their life that aren't going to change yet. There are going to be some things that change first to help establish a baseline for other things to be able to grow. And that you may need to help their family members and other people recognize what that's going to look like realistically. So you need to go in with a laser-like focus, say, here's what we're focusing on, here's their job, here's how their support system can help them. And hopefully there'll be some generalization, but there will continue to be mistakes and struggles in other areas, and that's okay. That's what we expect. It's not a reason to panic yet. It's just to recognize that this is where we are. That part's crucial, because trying to ask someone to change more than they have the capacity to at once can make it so they fail when otherwise they would be successful. So part of what we take a look at is, well, how do we prioritize? How do we know what comes first? So this may sound really, really silly, but down here at the bottom of, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm sure you all recognize. You're taking a look at, wait a second, it's really, really hard for someone to become emotionally better regulated when you think about what's common among people with pornography issues. Well, usually their sleep cycle is not very good, right? They go to sleep too late. They go to sleep with screens on. They are motivated to wake up at night to have unfettered access. And so we're taking a look at, maybe we can start with trying to establish a couple of patterns. This may sound silly, but making sure you're drinking enough water or having a vegetable recognizable as a vegetable sometimes. It may sound silly, but these are some of the basic things of the general sort of gut level feeling of wellness or illness. And also, if you're going to work on like perspective taking and self-reflection and things, that's really hard to do when you're sleep deprived and when you're relying on caffeine instead of sleep. So you kind of think, so one of the things that I often go back to this and kind of say, okay, so where are we along of the things that we need to change? Where do they fit? And let's start lower down on the pyramid and work our way up, because that supports the other changes that we're going to be trying to make. And again, I'm very explicit with them about here's why we're focusing on this first. Now, every now and then you have something where it's crucial, there's something that's time sensitive and whatever it may be, and we have to bump things around a little bit, but that's a general guide. So I want to throw something out there for you. So let's say you get to a point where the client has successfully stopped using porn for a period of time, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Is treatment done? We're good? Shake their hand, send them on their way? Yeah, I see a lot of really smart people nodding no. So I don't know how many of you guys have spent time in AA. I've spent a lot of time in AA. You guys all know what a dry drunk is, right? He's the guy who's like, I've been sober for 4 years, but he sure acts like an alcoholic still. He's still an ornery cuss. He's still dishonest. He's still self-seeking and self-serving. And so what's going on is he has not been drinking, yes, but he's not been doing any recovery. He's just miserable in abstinence, and that's not the same. So treatment is done when enough of the whole person's growth has occurred and is showing sustainability to predict that growth will continue. So they're showing a better job of self-regulating their emotions and their attitudes. They're more honest. They're more compassionate. They're able to be more productive. They're able to do more self-correction. And that as they've run into bumps in their lives, it's not that they've gone without struggle, but they're showing that they can respond to those struggles in a way that helps resolve them. So just keep in mind, and this is huge. I get this all the time. I've gone 90 days without porn. I am cured. That's impressive if it's true. I don't think it is. We're taking a look at, it takes a while to reshape your lens. And the difficult part is that the amount of change that needs to happen. And again, this is one place for us to look at this with empathy, is when you think about all these places, when you can say, well, all right, so I'm not looking at porn, so hopefully just all this other stuff goes away. And I hate to say that, but that's a masturbation mentality, because you've finished the deed, and now everything should be taken care of, right? It's an instantaneous gratification, instead of realizing life is a process that I need to continue to nurture. And so I'm still thinking about my recovery from the lens of an addict. And that's my next piece of work, right there. So again, one thing to be aware of is that while we're going through all of this, we do need to be aware of cravings when they come up, and especially in developing honesty. There was an article written, I don't know how many years ago now, by Dr. Mark Butler from BYU called Honesty for Recovery. It takes like a dictionary for most people to read to understand what he had to say, but his point was actually quite brilliant. And he's saying that there is no such thing as addiction without dishonesty. There's no such thing as recovery without honesty. But there's honesty which is sort of, hand in the cookie jar, okay, I'll admit to exactly what you caught me for with nothing else. Or there's honesty where I'll tell you the day after I relapse. I'll be honest, I'll come forward. But the real honesty is being able to be clear about, here's how I'm doing in real time. Here's where I'm feeling good, here's where I'm feeling bad, here's where there's temptations, here's where there's opportunities. I'm talking to people who are supporting me about that stuff in real time. And that takes a lot of the power out of the temptation, out of the craving. And it also connects you with your support in a place where they can actually do you some good, instead of just help you try to pick yourself back up after you've relapsed. So again, it's not just about monitoring, well, I'm tempted to use porn or I'm not tempted to use porn. It's, I found myself being irritable towards my children. I found myself feeling competitive with my coworker. It's tracking the attitudes, the actions, the patterns that are part of the way that porn has shaped them, and retaking territory for themselves that porn has claimed for itself in their personal identity and development. And so it's being aware of, I was feeling really judgmental. That's going on. And I know that part of that is being judgmental is another way of objectifying people. So I'm going to need some help working on that judgmentalness. Who am I feeling judgmental towards? How can I connect with my compassion towards them? So what are some signs of growth? And by the way, I want to recommend a resource. I love this book. It's called Willpower's Not Enough. It's written by Arnold Washington and Donna Boundy. And I will say it is the best layperson book on addiction and recovery that I have ever read. And I've read hundreds of them. So Willpower's Not Enough. Arnold Washington, as in I washed a ton of laundry. And Donna Boundy. Still available on Amazon. It's like $5, really affordable. Fantastic. So these are some signs where you can say, all right, they're actually beginning real recovery. So things like they're able to delay gratification. There's less need to control their situation and other people. They're able to be there for other people in a healthy way. They take appropriate and healthy risks. They're not driven to numb out feelings. That one is huge. I can sit with feelings. I can feel good and I can feel bad. I can do both. That's really important. The ability to deal constructively with negative emotions and criticism. They're not governed by their shame or their pride. Shame and pride are two sides of the same coin. Both are a wonderful way to destroy your life. And so you look like, and again, it might be say, well, I'm glad that they're not ashamed. Well, their pride is just as destructive. I'm glad that they're humble. Yeah, but if they're ashamed, there's still a prison to this idea that they must be something. They're able to face and actually resolve problems. They set appropriate limits and boundaries. Some more is that they don't look back on the past and go, oh man, those were the good old days when I got to party and when I got to do all that stuff. They've come to a point where they're like, I was not seeing things straight. They take on adult roles and they're able to feel adequate in them. They can admit when they're wrong. Oh man, that one's so important. Because that's what pornography is you can never admit you're wrong. You can never admit you've made a mistake. They're able to be interdependent with others. They can identify their needs and actually take care of them in healthy ways, which actually meet those needs. They can relax. You know, one of the things that I find is, can you sit down and just be? You don't have to pull your phone out. You don't have to get busy. Like, can you sit down and be with yourself and have that not be a crisis? That's actually a really good sign of recovery. They're not self-centered, but nor are they self-loathing. They avoid the victim stance, where they've always got a reason where someone else, something else is the reason for their behaviors or their struggles. There's so much more we could say, but I wanted to at least save a little bit of time to kind of talk about, okay, questions, input on how do we approach this with treatment, what resources are there. So floor's open for you guys. I actually managed to leave 15 minutes, which is good for me. So, all right. Yes? So Covenant Eyes. Is everyone familiar with what Covenant Eyes is? So it is a software program which is designed to help you not use pornography, specifically by helping you have a person who is monitoring along with you your internet use. So the way it looks is that you create support partners, and they are given an email list on a weekly basis about what your internet use has been. So what I'm going to say about Covenant Eyes is what I'm going to say about a lot of different things. So there's a couple things about Covenant Eyes. One is actively trying to connect you to a support person, which is something that I think is useful. I will say that's a good thing if the person wants a support person. If the person is seeing that as a police officer, then what I will find is that people will find a way around it. One thing to keep in mind is that how shall I say this? There are a lot of tools that are helpful if used the right way. Covenant Eyes is pretty good because it's fairly hard to bypass, but I also have people who've managed to bypass it in less than 48 hours. If you are saying, all right, my recovery is going to be about finding something which restricts me artificially and doesn't require me to actually control myself as well, then it doesn't matter how good the tool is. Because every tool has its weaknesses. And almost every one of these tools can be overcome simply by doing a factory reboot or reset on any device. And so I would say, yes, absolutely, there are a lot of good tools that you can use. But it has to be that person deciding to use it from a point where they're saying, I recognize that I'm struggling with my impulse control. I know I need something to assist me. I will use something. But if it's, I'm not bought into recovery, and this is something that I'm asking to be, that I'm allowing to be done instead of recovering, then they'll just blow right by it. So that's kind of my general approach to those kinds of tools. Good question, though. But to answer your question, as far as software packages out there, it is a good one. Yep. It is the one that's used by, so the first and probably most advanced treatment center in the United States, Restart, that's the one that they use. So, okay, other questions? Comments, insights? Good jokes? Yes? Mm-hmm. So I think I hear two parts to your question. Is one, how can parents know? And what are good, solid boundaries? Okay, so one of the things I would say is if I'm having parents of relatively young kids, one of the things that I'm wanting to do is talk about how often are we talking about sexuality and pornography. I would recommend that we're talking with kids about these things from the time they're very, very small. And that it's not just like we had the talk. The talk is lame. The talk does not work. It has to be an ongoing conversation as things come up. So what you'll find works the very best for parents as a preventative measure is that there's an ongoing conversation about, all right, hey, let's talk. You had your friends send you a couple of funny memes today. What did you like about them? Okay, where did they seem to be coming from? Was there anything uncomfortable about them? Or, we talk openly about, hey, so as you have this ongoing conversation about, hey, just because I want you to understand the way the world works, that pornography comes looking for you. So I want you and I to have a plan about when you encounter it, which you will. How do you want to handle it? And where do I fit into there? And we need to have a conversation about it. So that kind of preventative approach is absolutely the best. Now, the problem is we have a lot of parents who have steered away from trying to talk to their kids about sex, first of all. Second of all, they've assumed that the education they've received in church has been adequate to teach them about pornography, which it's not. So one of the things that we kind of have to do is help parents say, look, wherever you are, however good of a job you've done up until now, the most important thing to do is to kind of reach out, and one of the best places to come from that I've seen as a parent is to say, here's something that's hard even for adults. Like I was Googling for something the other day and this picture came up. I'm like, what the heck does that have to do with the price of eggs in the morning? But it came up. And it's like, and I realized I've never really talked with you about like how I handle that and what I do and why. And we begin to start having this conversation and saying, do you ever run into times like that? How have you handled that? Have you seen friends struggle with that? And you kind of begin to open it up as this conversation of this is something we're all working on. And then you kind of introduce to them, here's what I'm having to do as an adult. Let's talk about what maybe you need to do. Where can I help? That I found that beginning that conversation that way is very helpful. As far as what are good boundaries for families to have, do you guys have another 3 hours? So I'm going to try to give you a very short version of that. One is you have to have a realistic understanding of the child's developmental ability, right? One of the problems we get is that children are often given things that are well beyond their ability to understand and well beyond how developmentally advanced they are with their impulse control. I think one thing that's very helpful for parents to do is to have a very clear understanding about all the devices is, number one, these devices belong to me, they don't belong to you. Number two, that means I'm in charge, but I'm going to be trying to help you learn step by step about how you can be in charge. And we forecast, here are the challenges for people in general. And then with that child, you sit down and say, what's going to be the challenge for you? So like for me, my oldest son, the biggest challenge is he's going to try to watch every single D&D unpackaging there is on the internet at 2 in the morning. I'm glad we have that instead of other problems, but that's a problem we have. And so we're kind of taking a look at what do you think the challenges are going to be for you? What do you want to be trying to do to manage those? How are we going to know when you need some extra help? What's that extra help going to look like? And so we kind of help them sort of forecast and paint forward, for me, what are my challenges going to be? What part am I ready to tackle? How am I know that I'm going to be handling that well? What role do my parents have? So I will share a couple of things when we're talking about rules around pornography. I think it's okay for a parent to say, all right, so you're going to have to make some decisions for yourself in your life, but you need to understand that as your parent, the standard I have for you is that you won't be using porn. I want to explain to you why I have that standard. And it needs to go beyond because the prophet said, right, among our LDS clients. It's, I want to talk to you about why I've had experiences in my life that lead me to believe this is a boundary I need to set for you while you're my child. As a result, I also know that you will be exposed. It's going to happen. And you need to know that when you're exposed, and I let them know, there'll be a part of you that feels bad, and there'll be a part of you that feels good. There'll be a part of you that feels curious. Let me explain to you why that's the case. You help them know what they're going to get into, and say, and then here's how I want you to respond. And as I see you responding to me in that way, my confidence in your ability to work in a trustworthy way will be part of what helps me know that you're ready for more, as far as expanding some freedoms and things you have. So I love to set it up that way to begin with. And then there's a lot of different specifics. You know, some specifics that I usually recommend for anyone would be like, put the phone away, don't have it with you in bed. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics would pat me on the back for saying that one. One would be, I also want you to practice that when you're with people, that you put your device away. So there's just some general like device management stuff I would recommend. But around pornography, it's this is the boundary, it's no, here's why. However, when you're exposed, here's what you'll feel, here's what I'm going to help you with. And if I find that you're really struggling with that, know that I'm going to be in a position where I'm going to draw some stronger boundaries, because I don't want you to get into a whole lot of trouble with this where it's going to be really hard to get out. If we're getting into trouble, I want you to work on this, but you also need to know that I'm going to help you stop before it becomes too large of a problem. And at that point in time, my priority won't be getting you back into using the computer as quickly as possible. It will be helping you figure that out. So just knowing all of that ahead of time, having it all kind of clear and forecast, but not as like, you'd better do this or I'm going to take your technology. But that's a general approach that I would recommend. I'm not sure if that helps answer your question at all. Are they paying for their coverage? Awesome. So what you can let them know is, congratulations, I bought this house.
Do they pay for the electricity that charges us?
Yeah, and so what this means is that, this is important enough to me. You are important enough to me that while you're here in my house, there's certain standards. Now, I'm not going to say, give me your phone or I'm going to kick you out of the house, kid. But just help them recognize, I don't think this works the way you think it works. And again, you don't want to make it like, I'm going to hunt you down. But I use a little bit of a sense of humor, and I go and say, that's true. How much of taking care of yourself are you prepared to do right now? And if this is that important to you, then tell me. But there's this aspect of like, I love you too much to throw you into the middle of something without a guide, where experience has taught us that people need a guide. So good job buying your own device. I love how responsible you're being with that. Now let's work on you being responsible now that you have it. And that includes being able to be open to your parents. And again, I'd need to know the specific kid, because there's different ways in and whatever it may be. But that's kind of a general strategy I might use. Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things I do as well is I often go into this and say, all right, so help me envision something. So you're right that there's a lot of things about this that feel really great for you. And I'd also say, and there are people out there who get into trouble with this. I say, I might go like, do you know anybody? Like, do you see any friends and you've seen what can happen? I'm not saying I think you're doing any of that, but the reality is that this is both a wonderful blessing and it's a huge challenge. And when you take a look at people your age, there are people who handle it well and there's a whole lot more people who don't. And so my question is, maybe you can start by telling me what you think healthy is, how you're trying to go about that, how you monitor yourself, how well you're doing. Tell me more. Tell me more about this. I'm just saying there's a challenge. I'm saying here's how I feel about it. Here's what I think should be done. I'm wanting to see is one, can you recognize there's a challenge? And if so, what are you thinking of doing about it? And so it's not so much about like, hey, look, I'm going to force you. It's like, look, at the end of the day, I'm not wanting to be on one side of the team and you being on the other. I'm wanting us to both recognize together we've got a challenge. Clearly, either you've put some thought into this or you haven't. If you haven't, I want you to. If you have, I want to know what you've thought. And then maybe from there we can find a way where this feels like we're working on this together rather than feeling like I'm the cop and you're the robber. Yes, please. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, what I like about what you're doing from what you're describing is you're saying, okay, isn't it funny that you're saying I'm being responsible around this, but you're not treating it the way you treat other things you're being responsible with? Like, there's a discrepancy there. My kids have tried. It didn't turn out well. I wish that was true. But yeah, but you're right. I like where you're going is there's kind of this aspect of saying like, okay, I'm so sure I'm being responsible with this. Sometimes an analogy I use is like, okay, so let's suppose we go into McDonald's and we look around ourselves and say, okay, this is what most people are eating. So I'm going to assume since this is what most people are eating, that this constitutes a healthy meal, and I'm going to order that. And they're all like, yeah, that's stupid. It's like, okay, well, the problem is when we also take a look at our peers, what we know is that the average person has an unhealthy relationship with their electronics. And so if we're trying to gauge our health simply by whether we're meeting what everyone else is doing, then we're doing the whole McDonald's thing. I think you're smarter than that, which is the reason I want to help you think more deeply about this and ultimately serve yourself better. So, good thoughts. All right, guys, we have just hit the hour, but I will be around during the lunch hour if you want to hunt me down and ask any questions. Also, just as a reminder, you will be able to download the PowerPoint from Scenic View's website as soon as I give it to them, hopefully today.
Thank you.
Thank you.